So as I said, you're really welcome today on World Wetlands Day, where we're celebrating all of the different types of wetlands around Ireland. And we're really delighted to have two great guest speakers with us. So in a minute, I'm going to hand over to Alan Balfe from the Tralee Bay Wetlands Centre. And then we are also going to be joined by Katie Smirnova from FarmPEAT. And they're going to talk to us, like I said, about Irish wetlands and the type of plants and animals we find there and why they're important and how we can help them and what kind of problems they're facing and so on. Just before we start, I want to give you a few things that are coming up, a few dates for your diary. So there is a bit of a change of plan on National Tree Week. So you might have heard about Tree Week. It's every year in March, and this year, it's going to be from March 4th to 8th. That's the Monday to Friday. It had been planned to be later in the month, but it's been changed because it was a bit near Paddy's Day and Easter and so on. So if you want to mark those dates in your diary, we're going to have lots of events coming up for you to get involved in to celebrate trees. And a big thanks to everyone who took part in our Winter Biodiversity Challenge, which was to get out and do some bird watching. I know some of you were taking part in the Birdwatch Garden Survey. And just to remind you that if you did take part, maybe you missed a few weeks, you're not sure how good your results are, do send them in anyway. It doesn't matter if you only did 3 or 4 weeks, they still want to know. And do send any pictures you have of you taking part to us at bioevents@eu.antashka.org. We will be picking a school participated to win a biodiversity prize. And coming up this spring, our challenge is going to be Colours Watch. So we're asking you to get outside and find all of the different types of colours that are growing on flowers, leaves, even grasses. So we want you to try and start noticing the differences between the plants that are growing around you. And I'll be sharing some resources about that later in the month. And then lastly, coming up in May is Biodiversity Week, May 20th to 24th, and we'll have lots of things coming up then for you to get involved in too. Okay, and with that, today's webinar is to celebrate World Wetlands Day. And this webinar is being recorded and it'll be up on our YouTube channel later on. So don't worry if your video is turned on, that's fine. The only people's screens that will be recording are the video holders. So again, just a reminder, please keep your microphones on mute. There are a lot of us here today. So if you want to ask us a question or answer a question, you can use the chat box. And if any questions do come up to you, we will have time for a Q&A at the end. So after both Alan and Katie have spoken, you can ask them questions that. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and hand over to Alan.
Hi, everyone. I'll just see if I can get this to work now. That's sharing, is it?
Yeah, it is, Alan.
Excellent. Is that thing blocking the way?
That's perfect, yeah.
Okay. So hi, everyone. My name's Alan from Tralee Bay Wetlands. There we go. Why isn't this moving? Oh, there we go. Yeah. So just for any of you who haven't been here before, we're in Tralee in County Kerry. We are right on the coast, and this is us here. That's our centre. The entire park that we own is about 20 acres, and we have a big, huge lake in the middle. So, and you can see here at the back of the centre, we have these mountain range here. They're called the Slieve Mish Mountains, and they go from Tralee to Dingle. And there's actually a lovely little walkway. When you're probably older, you can walk there. It takes about 3 days to walk. So if any of you are planning a visit down here, we do pedal boats and we do up the tower, and we do orienteering, and we do pond dipping. So as a wetland centre, we're actually situated right beside this river here. That's called the River Lee, and that flows all the way out to Tralee Bay, which is on the coast. So that's just over here. It's a different Lee than the one in Cork as well, for any of you that are there. So we've got loads of different habitats, and they all help wetlands in general. So, and as Claire said, Tree Week is coming up. We've been planting hedges around the place, and they actually do help our ecosystems as well. They are very good for fish. So when we plant all these hedges, this is hawthorn. It's a bit of a spiky tree, but when we come to May, when you're driving around the countryside, you'll see loads of farmers' fields, and they're going to be pure white, and that's the flowers of these hawthorns. And loads of bees and flies like to take the pollen off of these. And sometimes when bees and flies go over the river, they fall into the river, and then fish get to eat them. So by having more of these kind of trees, we get more pollinators, and then that means there's more food for the fish and insects in our ponds and rivers. So it's really important we keep on planting these things. Now, so that's something you could do. And another thing you could do for World Wetlands Day is make small ponds. Now we've got 2 big ponds out the back. So that's them there. Really important, you find loads of cool stuff in there, like newts. They look a little bit like lizards, but they're not. They are amphibians. So it means they're in the same family as frogs. And frogs, you've all seen frog spawn, probably. They lay big clumps of frogs spawn. The newts here, they don't. They're very much more delicate. What they do is they lay an egg on a leaf, and they curl the leaf up to protect the egg. So they don't lay huge amounts of them. They lay just one egg at a time. Other things we found in our ponds. So this top fella here, you can all probably guess what he is. That's a froglet. So that's probably 6 weeks after being a frog spawn. And you can see at the back here, just developed its back legs. So soon it'll start developing its front legs, and the tail is going to disappear. And then it'll be more like a frog. And then what that frog is going to do, it's going to leave its pond, and it's going to jump away out into the grassland around it. And it's going to start eating bugs on the land. So frogs don't use the ponds that much, except for laying their frog spawn in and wintering in there. Now I have another picture after this as well. So this guy here, he's a cool little bug. He's called a damselfly. And this is a dragonfly. So they're both the baby versions. These are the adult versions. So you can see they're lovely colors, and they're fairly big. That's my hand. So that's an emperor. That's a 4-spotted chaser here. He's a red darter. We've over 10 different species of dragonflies, and they all start off like this. This is one here. He's a lot smaller. That's your damselfly. And all these dragonflies, they're really good predators. They eat loads and loads of insects. And they're a good indication. If you've got dragonflies, you've got a very healthy pond. Because they live for about 5 years inside the water. So they need to have lots of food, and the water needs to be clean and healthy. And when they come out of the ponds, you need to have good habitat around them. So this is our pond in 2013. It's newly put in, loads of algae, so it's not that good. 2017, we have a small bit of plants that we put in that helps clean up the algae. But after this, we stopped mowing the lawn. There's a nice bit of daisies there, but we stopped mowing the lawn, and then we got all this. So we got loads of dragonflies and bees that year. There's different things in there like clovers and daisies and dandelions and a couple of other unusual plants. But we had to leave the grass grow to see what was in there first. And it was full of wildflowers. We didn't plant any seeds in there at all. That all came naturally. And then again, 2023. So you can see back here, that's one that farmers don't like. It's called ragwort, but bees love it. Now, and we also have what's called a marsh. You can see here, loads of water in here. And this is probably during summer because you can see these plants here at the back. They're called reeds. There's a small bit of brown underneath. So the water usually goes up to the green part. So there's about a foot less water in there. So it's lost that during the summer, but that's all right because there's still loads of water in there. And that's what wetlands do. They hold on to lots and lots of water. So there's lots of water for all those animals that are in there. And when we need to get water for our taps, a lot of that water comes from our rivers. So this feeds into our river. It just slowly feeds the water into the river, and then we can then use it for drinking water then afterwards. And then during the winter, when it does rain, the water comes into these places and it gets held back because it's very muddy at the bottom, so the water can't pass through it very quickly. So it takes a lot of time for water to pass through here. And you can see here, this is another view of the center. That's the tower. Very good habitats for birds. You can see here, that's about 2 foot tall, all this stuff, all these sedges and rushes. Birds love these places because a big animal like us, if we go dodging through here, they'll hear us. And we're very slow moving as well because it's so muddy. It's very hard to get through it. So if the birds see us, they can fly away very, very quickly. And here's one. This is called a heron. I don't know, can you see on this side? He has an eel in his mouth. So an eel is another rare animal, and it's protected, but the heron love them. And it takes them a while to eat them because they're so slimy and wriggly. And here we have a lovely little bird called a moorhen. There's another one that's a bit like a moorhen. It's got a white head and it's called a coot. And that's where if any of you have heard it, it's called being as bald as a coot. And that's what that bird is. It's because it looks bald. Yeah. Now, this is a willow tree. And we have loads of these here at the center. And we use them sustainably. So willow has a cool thing it does. If you cut down willow, it'll grow back again really, really quickly. So we use our willow for different things. We use it for making willow fences, which is this thing here. We cut the willow, we shove it into the ground, and we weave it in and out amongst itself. So what's going to happen is that this fence behind it is going to rot away. And then we're going to so this fence behind it is just dead wood. And this willow is going to start flowering now as well. And all these uprights coming off the willow, we can cut them and we can put them into the ground again and make more willow fence. And there's just a cleaner version of it. So you can do loads of things with willow. It's very bendy and it just keeps regrowing, so you can use a lot of it. It's also very good for our bees as well. The queen bee for bumblebees a lot of them come out in about this time of year. So there's not much pollen, but these things are starting to flower now. They're one of our earliest flowering trees, and they produce huge amounts of flower. So that's going to give the bees plenty of nectar and pollen to get through the spring. And this is another thing we made for Halloween. That's one of our broomsticks. So this bit here is made of, what's that? Birch. Another tree called birch. And then this is all willow here. We just cut the willow and use it as the end of the broomstick. And this is another thing we do with our willow. Any extra bits of willow, we make a dead hedge. And loads of insects love this because they can creep in there and the birds can't get them. So it's actually a really good hiding spot for them. And if you start pulling this around or apart, you'll find loads of woodlice in there. So they're all taking shelter in there. And during the winter as well, when it's really cold, they'll go in there and they won't get frostbitten. Yeah. Now, as I was saying earlier, wetlands are places that they hold a load of water and release it for us. If you take away a wetland, all the water that wasn't there goes into your river and that ends up flooding downstream, which can be houses and stuff like that. So it's very important that we keep all these wetlands undrained. Drainage, people going around draining these wetlands is the worst thing we can do. But if we clog up all those drains, the water stays in those wetlands and we help save our rivers. And we get loads of animals. These guys here, they're called brent geese, and they're called Canadian brent geese. They fly over from Canada every year. So they need lots of clean wetlands to find food in. And that's our frogs there as well. Yeah, so we've got 3 amphibians in Ireland that rely on wetlands. That's our common frog. We've got the newt that I showed you earlier, and we have a natterjack toad. So you only find them in a few places. They're very rare. Now, you might see some of these things going into the water. What we're trying to prevent is these are drains coming off the road and from plants. We're trying to stop that because it's harming the rivers. We don't want pollutants going into the rivers because it hurts the fish and insects that are in there. And we are also getting our water from these places. So we try not to let any of that stuff in. Yeah, and unfortunately biodiversity is in decline. But if we keep making more ponds and if we keep blocking up the drains, we'll make these wetlands better. And if you make your own ponds at school, you'll end up getting dragonflies and frogs into your own area as well. Now, where we are is right beside, we're called Tralee Bay Centre, Wetland Centre, and there's a small area out beside us called Tralee Bay. It's at the very edge of the coast. It's a protected area because we get so many animals flying in every year. We get 20,000 birds flying in from different parts of the world to Tralee Bay. And that's very important. They stay here for the winter, and there's loads of different types of species, which I have pictures of. I'll show you in a minute. This bit is just about World Wetlands Day. So in 1971, a load of countries got together. They realized that there's a lot of pollutants going to our rivers, and that a lot of a lot of wetland habitats were being drained. So they picked out the most important places in the world, and they made legislation that those places will be protected. So we got for Ramsar, there's over 635 million acres protected. Ireland, all of Ireland is 20 million acres. So the amount of area that's protected is many times the size of Ireland. And these are just a small little places. These are a few Ramsar sites in the country. And this is where we are down here. And then we also have Castlemaine Harbour right beside us, which is another protected area. So this is all Tralee Bay here. This is a place called the Maharees. The center is in here. I'm just going to show you a few of the birds that fly in. These are hooper swans. Normally swans have a red beak. They're the ones we find here. They are called mute swans. These ones fly in from Iceland every single year, and they stay here from about October till April. And they make a big booming noise as well. These are the brent geese I was on about. These are shelduck, widgeon. These are teal. They're one of our smallest ducks that we get in Ireland. Pintails, scallops, mallards. I think most of you have probably seen a mallard because they're the most common duck we have. So that's the male, and this is the female. The male always has a red head, or a green head rather. And the females are this kind of brown color. And that's because when they're sitting on their eggs, they want to stay hidden. The males want to find a female, so they're a lot more brightly colored. And you can see that's the male there, that's the male there, that's the male there. And all the females are more browner colored because that's the habitat that they're laying their eggs into. It's a brown colored habitat. Now we got oyster catchers, ring plover, golden plover, grey plover, lapwings, sanderlings, dunlins, black-tailed godwits. bar-tailed godwits, curlew, redshank, turnstones. You can see here on the bar-tailed godwits, if you ever see a bird with any of these rings, it means that someone has caught them and put this ring on it. This is to identify. So people who put these rings on, they know where these birds have gone, and it's just to see where these birds are flying to. Because like I said earlier, people didn't know that the Brent geese used to fly from Canada or that the Hooper swans used to fly from Iceland until they start ringing them, putting these rings on them, and then they realized, then the bird watching people found them in Ireland and they realized that they were flying from Iceland or Canada. Our curlew is one of our rarest birds as well. It has a lovely long beak and it needs wetland habitats. See, all this mud is lovely and soft, so it's using its beak to probe the mud for worms and other bugs. What you'd find in the mud here would be stuff like ragworms. If you've ever seen anyone digging on the beach, they're usually looking for worms to go fishing with. Yeah, black-headed gull, common gull. And this is actually very important. This is a common oyster. This is our oyster. And we get whole reefs made out of these oysters. Fish love these because they can hide, all the small fish can hide in between the shells and they can stay safe. So it's very good for them. Let's get that. And yeah, these are some of the fish. Now these fish are found in Tralee Bay, Tralee Bay, but they're also found all over around the coast of Ireland as well. So this is my favorite one, the conger eel. It's a big, huge thing. That's someone's arm there. And you have a couple of shark species, which we'll go over in a second. So mackerel, probably most of you have heard of mackerel. They're the ones a lot of fishermen catch and eat. Mullet and a couple of rays, undulate ray. I can't see that actually. Tornback ray, rockling, whiting, grey gunnard, and a monkfish. He's not the prettiest face in the world. This picture is probably not a good scope because they're a lot smaller than that. This picture makes them look huge, but they are very tiny. And it's only very recently that people have found that we have a lot of sharks in Ireland and that they're actually laying their eggs here. This one is actually called, in the background, that's a basking shark. We get them off the coast here the whole time. They're one of the biggest kind of sharks. And the reason why his mouth open here is because he's catching a lot of algae and plankton, and he's eating that. So they don't eat people. They're what we call filter feeders. He's filtering out the water, and any little bits in it, he's eating it, or they're eating them. So yeah, in 2014, a poor beagle shark washed up in Kerry. People didn't know we had these sharks. So once that washed up, people went into the water, kind of diving and trying to find out where it came from. And they found out that there's actually a huge nursery of sharks and rays, and that they are all laying their eggs out here. And people didn't know this up until recently. So there's your angel shark, undulate ray, and this here is your poor beagle shark. That's the one that washed up. That's what the farmer found on the beach. So they're all around the coast, but they don't come in too close. So if you're swimming, you don't have to worry about them. You're not going to find any sharks swimming around you. And this is another rare one that they didn't think came into Irish waters, but they found out that it actually does. It's just well off the coast. And that's more or less it. Thank you for watching.
That was great, Alan. Thanks a million. Really interesting. It's great to see the huge amount of different types of species living around us. You might not know we're there. So I'm going to hand over to Katie now in a sec. So if you can stop screening there, Alan, and I will spotlight Katie. There we are. Okay, over to you, Katie.
Thanks very much. I'll just share my screen here. Now, can you see that okay?
Yep, perfect.
Brilliant. Okie dokie. So, hi everyone. Thanks so much for having me today, Claire, and happy World Wetlands Day, everyone. That was a great talk, Alan. Thanks so much. I learned loads. I was fascinated by sharks as well. The marine science side of Ireland's biodiversity is just a whole other world. So I must dive deeper into that. So I'm going to be kind of talking about peatlands. So Alan mentioned those on his talk as well, and some of the different types of birds and animals that you'd see there as well. So as part of the FarmPEAT project, we're particularly focused on raised bogs, and I'll explain what a raised bog is shortly. And what we do is we try to promote farming with nature in the Midland raised bog landscape. So what this means is we work with raised bogs in the Midlands of Ireland. So these would be counties like Offaly, Roscommon, Westmeath and Kildare. And I know some of you from the chat, I can see that you're kind of in Dublin, so you'd be near enough to Kildare, and perhaps you've been on some of our project bogs. So we have 8 different project bogs that are listed here, and these are in those 4 counties I mentioned. So we have a couple in Offaly, near Ballinasloe, near Athlone, Ballydangan Bog. Then we have Ballynamona Bog, and down in Offaly we have Clara Bog as well, and Dangan Bog for Ban, Raheen Moor and Umaris. So some of those might just sound like, you know, crazy words, but if you're in those areas locally, you can actually go and visit some of these bogs yourself. And this picture here shows the sort of farmers that we generally work with. So I'll explain in a little while how raised bogs form and, you know, how they were drained and how this different farmland was formed. But basically, we work with farmers who have grassland near bogs. So it might be adjacent to bogs, or it might not be too far away from them. Where, for example, in this picture, on one side of the tree line, they have the raised bog with all the heather, sphagnum moss, etc. And then on the other side, you have your grassy field where a lot of farmers would have cows for beef or for dairy or sheep as well. So these would be the sort of farms we'd work with. And underneath that is peat soil. So underneath the grassland are peat soils. And I'll talk about how peat soils form now. So raised bogs are just one of 3 types of peatland in Ireland. There's also fens and blanket bogs. And raised bogs are different from blanket bogs because they form in shallow lakes and depressions. So rather than forming high up on the mountains, where some of you might have seen them if you're out on a hike, for example, raised bogs form in kind of dips, like lakes. And they're fed by rainfall from above. So this means that the rainfall has very few nutrients. And so raised bogs are what we call nutrient poor. They have very few nutrients, and this means that there's only particular types of plants that will grow there. So there's very unique types of plants that you'll see on a raised bog, and they're very, very deep. So they can be usually way more than 3. They usually be kind of 8 or 9 meters, up as deep as 12 meters deep. So this is underneath the surface. And raised bogs started forming 10,000 years ago. So we were in the Ice Age back then. And then when the Ice Age kind of finished, the temperature started warming up and all the glaciers started melting. There was these different shallow lakes that were left as a result of the glaciers. So this happened because the glaciers moved through the landscape, and some parts of the ground were soft and some parts of the ground were hard. And so as they moved, they created hollows and dips in the soft parts, and then they left the hard parts higher up. And so this created these different dips. And over time, you can see that there's plants on either side of the lakes. So over time, this vegetation, the different plants, started to move inwards. So they started dying, the leaves would fall off, like in the autumn time, the leaves would fall, they'd go in towards the edges of the lake, and slowly but surely, they colonized further and further into the lake. And so this started building up the peat soils. And the reason why peat formed is because underneath the water, there's very little oxygen. And if there's no oxygen, then all of those plants, the dead plants, you know, they can't actually break down, they can't decay. So instead of decaying and breaking down and turning into kind of, you know, like compost kind of, they instead form peat. So they collect at the bottom there, and over time they build up and up and up. And so this is how our raised bogs started forming. The first step was they got higher and higher and higher, and they formed into a fen, so which is a different type of peatland. And then as the vegetation kept growing, they started forming this little hill shape. So remember I said that they can be up to 12 meters deep. So this is this part here, the dark brown. And the vegetation kept going higher and higher and higher because the peat soils kept building up, because there was plants growing on top of the soil. And as the plants on top died, underneath, because the water level was so high, they didn't break down, and all of those dead plants formed peat. And then they started getting colonized by sphagnum mosses and other raised bog plants that I'll mention in a short while. And these were the bog builders. So remember I said that the bogs are nutrient poor. So sphagnum mosses and other plants are really well suited to nutrient poor environments. And they kind of started a loop. So they kept making the habitat more acidic, forming more peat, and this made the habitat even better for these particular types of raised bog plants. But unfortunately, these bogs weren't really viewed as useful. In fact, they were viewed as wastelands. And so instead of protecting them, years and years ago, starting in the early 19th century, we started draining these bogs because we thought, okay, well, we can't farm in them, they're too wet. We can't even really go walking on them or build railways or do anything because it's so wet. And so because they didn't really understand the benefits for climate change, for nature back then as well, they started draining them and harvesting the peat for turf, to burn for energy, for fuel in fireplaces, and also to start changing these areas into farmland. And when the bogs are drained, so when you put in a drain along a bog, what happens is that the water level drops, and then also the bog surface then starts to drop. So as soon as the water level is lower down, all of that peat soil starts to break down, and then there's less peat soil underneath. And this lower bog surface and water level starts to release carbon emissions. So you might have heard about climate change as part of green schools. And with climate change, it's caused by these greenhouse gas emissions like carbon dioxide and methane being released from different things. So from burning fuels, for example, but in the case of peatlands, it's from all of that carbon, all of those dead plants that were stored in the peat soil, that when they're drained, all of that carbon that was previously stored is now dried out, and all those gases are released because now they're exposed to the air. And so FarmPEAT is trying to tackle this in a farming context. So you can see here that there's sheep on the right-hand side of the screen. And the issue is, I suppose, that a lot of these areas have been reclaimed for agriculture. And so it's not as easy as saying, okay, well, let's block all the drains and stop all the carbon emissions, and that's it. Because now a lot of these are actually being used for farming. It's people's livelihoods. They rely on it for their income. And so we can't just, change everything back to the way it was. But what we can do is we can start to block the drains. We can block the drains up to a particular level. And this means that the farming can still continue, where, you can still see the sheep there on the right-hand side. So by installing dams, we help to raise the water level a little bit, so those peat soils are protected, but also that the farming can still kind of go on. So the farmers aren't losing their land. They can still continue having their sheep, having their cows, because the grassland is still there, but the water level is just that bit higher that their birds and the carbon emissions are also benefiting. So there's less carbon emissions because the water level is higher, and because all of those peatland plants can now come back in, because there's more wet bog pools, for example, in certain parts of the bog, that those birds can then benefit from that. Some birds like the curlew, for example, that Alan mentioned earlier. So that's just a short summary of how raised bogs formed. So remember, there was big lakes, the plants started to colonize, and the dead material didn't break down. And so this resulted in peat soils building up, and then eventually it turned into a raised bog. And some of the plants that you'll see on a raised bog are really unique. So we have insect-eating bog plants, and these are just 3 of the ones that you'll see in Ireland. Maybe you've seen some other ones, some of the ones you might have seen in other documentaries or something, might have been like the Venus flytrap, but these are the 3 you'll see in Ireland. So we have the sundew. So on the right, on the sundew, you have these little tentacles. So you can see that there's little like tentacles around the yellow part, the green part of the plant. And on each of these tentacles, there's a sticky gland, like a trap. And so what happens is that insects fly towards these sweet, sticky traps, and then the plant closes in on them and traps them. So that's how the sundew works. And you'll see these around on lots of different bogs. And then the bladderwort is a little different. So the bladderwort also attracts them in through this kind of sugary substance, sugary liquid, but then it sort of sucks them into a trap, and they're sucked into the plant, and then the bladderwort kind of closes shut like this. And then the butterwort is a little bit different again. It's more similar to the sundew, because what happens is that on those little leaves, and it looks like a beautiful purple flower, but the leaves also have this kind of sticky substance. And so they'll land on the leaves, and then the leaves will close in around the insects and trap them. And so that's how these three plants eat. And remember I said that there's unique plants on a raised bog because it has so few nutrients. So the reason why these bogs, evolved, why these insect-eating bog plants evolved and formed, was because there's so few nutrients in the soil that these plants need to get creative. They need to find a different way to get all of the nutrients that they need. And so instead of getting it from below, they try to get it from above. So they try to get it from those insects flying around the bog. So this is how that nutrient-poor environment, has kind of contributed to the way that these insect-eating bog plants live. And some of the other ones you'll see are these unique plants here. So we have, on the left-hand side, we have sphagnum moss, which is bog builder. Bogs wouldn't exist without sphagnum moss, because sphagnum moss holds 20 times its own weight in water. It's like a massive sponge. And sphagnum moss is also kind of like an iceberg. So above the surface, it looks like a teeny little moss. There's not much to it. But underneath the soil, there's loads of dead moss. And that dead moss is what's storing all that water and helping the peat soils form and get taller and taller and taller. So without sphagnum moss, raised bogs wouldn't be able to stay healthy. And some of the other plants you'll see here is this devil's bit scabious. This is a beautiful purple flower, which is really important for the marsh fritillary butterfly. I'll have a photo of the marsh fritillary butterfly in the next slide. And then we have heather here. You might have seen heather out if you're out on a hike. Sometimes you'll even see it in garden centers. And then underneath here, you have your bog cotton. And you can guess why it's called bog cotton, because it kind of looks like cotton. So it has those beautiful poofy white kind of bits on the top. So these are just some of the plants. There's loads of other bog plants that you'll see, but I just wanted to focus in on these four. So remember this purple flower here, the one that looks like a circle? That's the devil's bit scabious. And then this butterfly here, this beautiful orange and yellow butterfly, is the marsh fritillary. And this is the butterfly that relies on the devil's bit scabious. So if the devil's bit scabious isn't there, then the marsh fritillary won't be able to reproduce as well, because it's its main food plant. So it's a very picky kind of eater. It'll particularly eat devil's bit scabious. And if devil's bit scabious isn't there, then the marsh fritillary won't do very well. And these are some of the other animals and kind of insects that you'll see on a bog. So underneath here, we have the hen harrier, just one of the predator birds that you'll see out on our bogs. And then on the top right, you have the raft spider. So it might kind of looks a bit spooky, but I don't know if anyone particularly loves spiders, but this one's a really cool one. So you see it sitting on top of the water, and it has these kind of little hairs that help it balance and walk along the water on top of it without falling in. And it kind of uses the water as a web. So the way most spiders will use a web to figure out if someone's trapped. So if the web moves, it gets trapped, and then spider comes and eats its prey. But the raft spider does the same thing with the water. So in the bog pools, in a raised bog, it notices any sort of vibrations or movements or ripples in the water, and then it knows that that's where the prey is. And so that's how the raft spider hunts. And then underneath here, we have the viviparous lizard. So Alan mentioned that there's 3 amphibians in Ireland. There's the common frog, the natterjack toad, and the newt. And then we also only have one lizard. So this lizard is found in our raised bogs, and you might see it if you're out on a sunny day and they kind of be basking in the sunlight. And what's really cool is that if they get attacked, they can actually shed its tail to escape, and then they'll kind of regrow it. So these are some of the animals you'll see. And we're going to move on to our quiz now because I want to make sure we have time for it. But these are just some of the other benefits that you'll see on the bog. So I've already mentioned the climate change, trying to fight against all the increased storms, trying to prevent droughts. But also bogs are really important for history. We found bog bodies in the bog. It's not only dead plants that don't break down, it's also anything that's in the bog. It's great for preserving things. And so they found dead bodies in the bog. And they found this pieces of butter. So years ago, people used to have bog butter. They put butter in the bog to store it. And then it also helps to fight against flooding. So this is what Alan mentioned earlier as well, the fact that our peatlands, our wetlands can store so much water. And so raised bog is really important for preventing flooding as well. By restoring them, by protecting them, we can help our towns and villages stay safe from flooding. And we're going to now move on to our bog quiz, but just keep these benefits in mind, okay, for any other kind of projects or work that you do down the line. So for our bog quiz, if maybe you have a pen and paper in your classes, yeah? So you can have a pen and paper, or else you can throw your answers into the chat box as a class, and your teacher can type it into the chat box, whatever you prefer, okay? So we only have 5 questions, so we'll fly through these. Now, are we ready to go? Okay, so we're going to go to question 1, okay? And you can throw your answers into the chat box or write it down on a piece of paper. So question 1 is, what is a bog mostly made of? Is it A, clay? The water moves very slowly through the small grains. B, water, you'll need your wellies. Or C, sand, the rain flows away very quickly. Okay, so I'll give you a couple of seconds to throw answers into the chat. Very good. Okay, so we ready to move on to question 2? So question 2 is, how fast does peat form? A, 1 millimeter a year, B, 1 centimeter a year, or C, 1 meter a year? So again, you can throw your answers into the chat box. 1 millimeter, 1 centimeter, or 1 meter? All right, question 3. Which of these plants helps to form peat? A, bog cotton, B, heather, or C, sphagnum moss? All right, ready to move on? Question 4. Which of these activities harm bogs? You can select more than one. A, turf cutting, B, drainage for farming, C, planting trees on peat, or D, fire. So which of these activities harm the bogs? You can select as many as you want. Okay. And our last question is question 5. Blocking drains on peat soils will help to save bogs. Is this true or false? Okay. So we ready to go through the answers together? And this is, by the way, is a photograph from one of our project farms. This drain was installed in one of our project farms in Roscommon. Okay, so the answers. So the answer to question 1 was water. Absolutely. A peatland is mostly made of water. And you'll definitely need your wellies if you're going there on a walk. And you have to make sure not to accidentally end up in a bog pool or a drain, because it's easier than you think. Question 2, the answer was 1 millimeter a year. So this is really, really small. So maybe after this webinar, find a ruler, look at 1 millimeter and realize, that's how slowly the bog forms. Remember, they started forming 10,000 years ago and they're only 12 meters deep maximum. And so by protecting them right now, it means that we can, we can keep as many of the peat soils there as possible, because it'll take years and years and years for them to recover. Then question 3 was, the answer was sphagnum moss. So remember I said that sphagnum moss is a bog builder because it stores so much water and there's loads of dead material underneath. And there's just over 20 types of different mosses, but there's kind of 4 or 5 different types of mosses that you'll mostly find on a bog. So it's not just one type of moss. There's different types of sphagnum moss. Then the answer to question 4 was all of the above. So actually, all of these 4 activities harm bogs. So turf cutting, because it physically takes the peat off the bog. Drainage, because remember I mentioned that it causes the peat soils to break down and dry out. And if they're not wet, then the peat isn't storing carbon. And planting trees on peat is not great as well, because trees need loads of water to grow. And so they suck up all the water from the peat soils. And then D, fire. So fire isn't very healthy for bogs either. And then our last question, the answer was true. So blocking drains on peat soils will absolutely help to save bogs. It keeps them wet, it keeps the soils nice and moist so that they're not losing all the carbon emissions, and it helps for different bog plants to grow as well. So before blocking drains though, and this is my last kind of couple of slides, before blocking drains, we need to do a few things to make sure that we do the correct work in the correct place. So we can't just go around blocking drains left, right, and center, because remember I said that it's on farmland, and sometimes your neighbors won't be happy if all of a sudden their field is wet when they didn't want it to be wet. And so before blocking a drain, we need to figure out, what is the type of rock underneath, and this is called geology. The second thing we need to figure out is what type of soil is underneath. So is it peat soils? Is it all peat soil? Or is it kind of maybe a mixture? Is there different types of soil in different parts of the field? And that's called soil science. We need to figure out then, how is the water moving through the field? And this is called hydrology. So these 3 sciences, geology, soil science, and hydrology, are 3 different sciences that we use before blocking drains. And this is a photograph of our project team and one of our hydrologist partners, Hugh Cushnan, out here on the left-hand side on the bog. So that's Hugh in the high vis there. So Hugh helps us figure out, how to avoid impacts on neighboring farms, which is really important if we're doing work with farmers. And what FarmPEAT does is we help farmers to, improve the kind of benefits of their land for carbon, for biodiversity. So we use positive indicators. So positive indicators are plants that show that a bog is wet, rather than dry. So the sort of plants you'll find if the bog is in good condition or a field is in good condition. So these are some of the things we look out for: sundew, devil's bit scabious, the yellow flower there, bird's foot trefoil, and then marsh thistles as well. And it's like a test. So the higher the score, the more of these positive indicators that the farmer has, the higher payment they get. So the better they're doing in terms of biodiversity, the higher they're getting paid. So the better their biodiversity, more money in the pocket. And this is a summary of the results-based approach. And it's really important for rewarding farmers for the positive work that they're doing on the ground. And then the last thing I want to do before we go to Q&A is just remind you that FarmPEAT has a Love Your Wellies competition. So if your class wants to take part in this, you'll have to figure out, what sort of theme do you want to pick? So what story do you want to tell about the peat landscape? Do you want to talk about the environmental benefits of bogs? Do you want to talk about farming, how your local community relates to the bog? Is there any projects happening on peatlands near you? The history of the bog. So remember I mentioned that bog bodies have been found in our peatlands, and bog butter, and lots of other different things as well. And then you choose how you want to tell your story. So we have different kind of categories, but you can really, get as creative as you want. So for example, some of our finalists from last year did this embroidered t-shirt. So this was Olivia Pixkowska, our first place winner, who embroidered Clara Bog on a t-shirt. But then we also had entries, such as paintings, drawings. There's a Bog Busters comic and 3D models as well, or digital submissions like graphics design or doing stop motion animation. Really, whatever you can think of, you're able to do. And you can look at our YouTube channel, the videos about Love Your Wellies on our FarmPEAT YouTube channel for inspiration as well. So thanks so much, folks. And I'll move to Q&A, I think, with Claire and Alan now. Sorry for being a couple of minutes over, Claire, but I hope there's still time for questions. So I'll stop screen sharing now. So thanks very much, folks.
That was great, Katie. Thanks a million. Yeah, no worries at all about going a couple of minutes over. There was so much great information there. So guys, if anybody does have any questions, you can put them in the chat now, for either Alan or Katie. And we'll try and answer a few in the next few minutes. I'm sure there's lots. Just while you are thinking of what you want to ask there, I might actually start with a question. I'll try not to ask too many of my own because I had loads, but I might start off with one for Alan. You mentioned about schools being able to maybe put in their own little ponds, that might be able to attract things like dragonflies. How large of a pond would you say a school would need to put in to be able to start seeing interesting creatures coming in and visiting them?
I suppose nearly the size of a table even. I know some people have put in small bowls, and you won't get dragonflies because it's not big enough, but what you will get is birds coming in to wash themselves. And you get small little bugs like pond skaters in there as well. But if you do something like I had one at home and I got a few dragonflies. It was just about the size of a normal desk. And just make sure if you ever do put one in, make sure there's a very gentle slope, because all the frogs, they don't like steps like a stairs because they can't hop over that. They need like a very gentle gradient so they can walk in very easy. And again, if you want to put something like a willow fence around it, just to ward it off, just in case anybody goes wandering over by accident where they shouldn't be on their own. But a willow fence is actually a great little thing to keep people out that are unsupervised.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alan. And actually, I've just put a poster there in the chat on how to create a small pond. So that might be helpful if anyone's thinking of it. So a few questions coming in. So one for you here, Katie. These might be a bit tricky. So Lachlan wants to know how many bogs are there in Ireland? That might be a hard one to say exactly.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly like how many bogs, but I know that the estimated area of peatlands in Ireland is 1.5 million hectares, which works out as about a fifth, so about 20 to 21% of Ireland's total land area. Now, this is all peatlands, kind of like blanket bogs and fens, as well as raised bogs. So about a fifth of Ireland's land surface. And Ireland has one of the biggest amounts of peatland in any European country. So in a global, around the world, Ireland is known for its peatlands and how protected they are in comparison to other countries in Europe that have removed them, years and years ago. So yeah, about 1.5 million hectares.
Okay, much more than we might think. All right. And Alan, how long has the Wetland Centre been in operation?
We opened in 2012. And yeah, so we're 12 years old now, yeah. Just gone this year. So we've
Very
seen a
good.
good bit of change happen. We've let grass grow, we've planted trees. So there's a lot more birds and animals around now at the moment.
Very cool. And Killavarrig School would like to know, where is the biggest bog in Ireland? Do you know, Katie?
Oh. That's a tough question. I mean, if you think about it, I'd say the blanket bogs are probably the biggest, like absolute bogs, because they cover huge mountain ranges, you know. But that's just my thinking. In the Midlands, like some of the most important bogs would be like Clara Bog, for example. Clara Bog is a really important protected raised bog. It's one of the kind of best quality ones that are left. But I'm not 100% sure if it's the biggest. It's just one of the ones that's most important for biodiversity, you know, in terms of its conservation value. So, but I might look that up and get back to you.
Very cool. So someone has just asked there for the YouTube playlist. So I think I have found it here. I'm putting it in the chat. You can let me know if that's not right, Katie. Oh, you did it yourself. Sorry, I missed that. And we have someone asking, how do flowers grow in the bog? So it does sound like they're a bit different the way that they form, even the idea of insect eating ones. Any insights into that, Katie?
Well, yeah, there's lots of other bogs as well, like plants as well. Like the devil's bit scabious is a flower that's not insect eating, you know, but they're just particular plants that are adapted, so they do better with fewer nutrients. So they grow the same way as they do in any other soil. You know, they have roots, then they, you know, have flower, they die off, and then they flower again. They grow from seeds, so they grow the same way as all other flowers do. It's just that there's different types of flowers that grow in a bog than will grow in your garden, for example, because they have to do better in low nutrients. But it's, for example, sometimes you'll have flowers, you know, in a wetland, you know, along a marsh, or in wet soil that you won't have in an area with really dry, sandy soil. So it's the same way that all plants are, you know, particularly suited to their environment. So the bog plants grow the same way, they're just different types of plants.
Brilliant. And then it's a nice one here, maybe we'll end on, because it's 12 o'clock now. So Evan would like to know, what is your favorite type of bog plant? And I might ask Alan to answer similarly, what's the favorite plant that you find growing in Tralee Bay wetlands? If you can both have a think about that and answer.
I think my favorite one is probably Lady's Smock. It's lovely little white flower. You don't know it's there until it goes into flower, because it's just really green and a very thin stalk. And there's a butterfly called the orange tip butterfly, and it will only lay its eggs on that one plant. So we've been collecting the seeds and kind of spreading them around the place, hopefully to try and spread that lady smock and get more orange tips flying around the place.
Very nice. How about you, Katie? Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I think sundews are just really cool. I think they're very pretty, but in a really kind of a cool way, because you think they're so beautiful, and then actually they eat insects. So I think they're one of those unsuspecting ones. I really like them. Yeah.
Nice. And we'll sneak one more in from Killavarrig. I could see them waving away in the background there. I don't know, can you answer this, Alan? But they would like to know, what is the biggest type of shark found off the coast of Ireland?
I'm gonna say basking shark. Because they're same size as a boat, you know, a proper big enough boat, not like a dinghy. And they grow up to, I can't remember offhand, but they do grow up a good few meters in length. Like I'd say most of the kids there could probably fit in one of their mouths.
Don't try that, guys. That's brilliant, guys. Well, look, really, really interesting presentations, and really want to thank you both for speaking to us today for World Wetlands Day, and a big thanks to all the classes who've come along for all your great questions. And there was lots of you getting all the answers correct for Katie's quiz as well, so it's great to see that you were picking things up. So yeah, we'll wrap up here, and if anyone does have any other questions, you can email them on, and I'm sure Katie and Alan will do their best to answer. And I will I've passed on the links to both of their websites, so again you can find out more there. But yeah, we'll leave it at that, and a big thanks again to everybody for coming. Bye everybody.
Right, see you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye.